Privyet, comrade. We are here today on the East German front, looking out for American spies, performing infiltration activities and capitalism. And we have just found our mark. Look beyond the wall.
Look, comrade, they are exchanging goods for money, making profit. We cannot have this here. There is only one solution, comrade. We must eliminate them for the good of our socialist society.
Privyet, comrade. Welcome back. I'm Kurt. This is Okindamo. It is still freezing cold, as you can see. And unfortunately, but fortunately, today we have one of the most beautiful pistols ever made by the Soviet Union. Perhaps one of the most beautiful guns ever made by the Soviet Union, the Markov. Specifically, a Bulgarian Markov. So unfortunately, these are the absolute biggest heat sinks that I could find. And my hands are currently freezing. But to aid in these cold temperatures, today we have an East German great cloak, proper, with the, from what I understand, I'm not certain on this one here, Luftwaffe stripings, with a yellow here is like a first class sergeant in like their recon division from what I understand. The man who sold this to me is 6'3", so he's Giga Chad size, unlike myself unfortunately. So leave me a comment down below on how dorky I look with it flapping around in the wind and my safety pins making it actually fit decently, and let's get into it. The PM Pistolet Makarova, or as I call it, just the Mackie, is a classic design put in by the Soviets in 1951 to replace the long-standing TTs, or the Tokarev pistols, as well as the 1895 revolvers. This was mostly done because the TTs were considered too heavy, too large, and just too cumbersome for the average soldier, as well as having zero safety features on them, which the USSR claims that resulted in many officers shooting themselves in the legs while going to draw for the pistol. Now, what they were probably aiming at was more than likely conscripts, which they were, on their side, but the Russian government really didn't care about that part too much from what I understand, just that they were shooting their officers. Based on these requirements, the Markov features a slew of safety features, including a safety that locks both the trigger as well as the slide from moving while it is going. The safety also triples, I guess, as a decocker for the firearm when the gun is to the rear. This is also followed by a extremely long, there we go, and gritty double action trigger pull, but even in single action, the trigger is fairly heavy. But the single action trigger I find to be at least fairly decent without too much take up and being a fairly clean break. They also decided to switch away from a more Western style of mag release with the thumb. They claimed that magazines were getting lost too much, and they didn't want people doing that, obviously, to a more European style of mag release with the heel. Honestly, the magazine release system that they did go with is fairly decent for being a heel release. It has this little tab in the front there where you can put your index finger, and then you can just hit it with your thumb, and your index naturally glides it out, resulting in it being not as bad as one might think, especially compared to some other heel designs that are out there which tend to get stuck, I find at least. Speaking of magazines, if you guys are ever on the market for them, I bought all of mine on eBay to be honest, they're fairly decently priced, but you need to look out for the different base plates. As you can see, this base plate here likes to move forward quite a bit, and the only malfunctions I've ever had with this gun that weren't a result of me limp wristing it came from this one here, because the spring tension just isn't properly done when the tab is forward. As you can see here, the classic surplus magazine doesn't move, but beyond that, to make it even worse, this base plate here is made of like a brushed or powder coated aluminum. I don't really know the terms, so since it's aluminum and not steel, I don't want to just pinch it down because then the aluminum would more than likely just crack and break. So it goes from being semi-useful to just completely useless. Originally, there was two contracts for these future pistols, let's call them. One in 7.62x25 Tokarev and one in 9x18. Obviously, the 9x18 Markov ended up winning, as we have this guy nowadays. This was mostly due to the fact that the 9x18 operated with lower pressures, which allowed the design to be much simpler. As such, we are rocking just a straight blowback design, no tilting barrel, no nothing fancy and crazy like that. Speaking of cost savings, this is oftentimes compared to the Walther PP, and rightfully so, they do look
very similar, well, not like this, but very similar, and the Russians took a lot of tooling, plans, and people from the Germans at the time, but instead the Markov is a vast simplification of the PP. The PPs are generally seen with about 42 parts, while these guys here normally have about 27. It varies a little bit model to model, so plus or minus like 5 on each one sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the Markov is far, far simpler. One of my favorite simplifications and additions here with the slide lock. As you can see, the slide lock actually doubles as your ejector. The slide lock is a feature that the Walther PPs just didn't come with. So they were able to get more into the gun with less parts, which I find really fascinating. Testing was also done on durability between these two designs by the Soviet government. And the Soviets found that the Markov was far, far more reliable than the PP, having less failures than the PP. But the Soviets also found that the soldiers were much more easily able to swap parts, since there was just less to take apart. Honestly, this design philosophy is seen across most Soviet guns in this area with something like the AK. Make it cheap to make, easy to fix, and make it so reliable that it just probably won't break. And if you do, well then it's a quick, easy swap, so who really cares? But just because it's a cheap and easy pistol to maintain does not mean anything low quality. In fact, both the slide and the frame are fully milled, which results in it weighing about 26 ounces or 730 grams. And funnily enough, this has the exact same, or basically the exact same dimensions as a Glock 43X, whether it's, I guess that's length, width, or height. They are the exact same, which I find really funny, and honestly is the reason I did end up carrying this for about a year and some change. I had two problems. I needed a carry gun, and I was looking at these guys and I was worried that prices were going to go up. Well, thankfully it never really ended up happening. I bought this for about the same price that it is now. And obviously the modern choice is better, but how cool is it walking around town knowing you got an old piece of Soviet tank steel pointing at your left nut? I think that's pretty baller.
While this isn't my first choice for my CCW nowadays, they are extremely affordable, and many people just have them laying around as just a fun range toy. But it's really not a bad option. Back when I got mine, these cloth holsters were the only ones really available, and not gonna lie, they're kind of garbage. There was also like the Amazon Kydex holsters, which I wouldn't trust for a damn thing. Nowadays though, companies such as Vetter Holsters are making proper Kydex holsters for these guys, so you have a legitimately safe option. Now, I know all of you guys are mad. I am sorry. Yes, of course, your carry gun is the best one, whether it's the 43X or the 365 or whatever the hell you might have. I'm sure someone here's rocking the J-frame every day, which I don't know why. But let's say you live in an East German state, somewhere where 10-round magazines are banned, or anything over 10-round magazines are banned. This guy is only 8+1, allowing you to successfully get past all of those restrictions. And while it might not be as powerful as a 9x19, like a nice hollow point, like a nice Federal or whatever, hollow points do exist for these guys. Many companies such as PPU, I believe Buffalo Bore made them in the past, and Silver Bear used to import quite a few. These are actually the Silver Bear ones, giving you quite a leg up over just your standard 9x18 ball. But for states like, I believe New Jersey has it, where you can't have hollow points, you're still good to go. The 9x18 is, from what I've seen, roughly 10 to 15% more powerful than a 380. And I mean, bragging rights, if you clap some guy that's attacking you with a Makarov, like, that's just really cool. That's a lot better than just, oh, I got him a 43X or whatever the hell you were rocking. This gun also offers many ways to carry it, which I honestly think is a perfect starter gun for somebody just starting to carry. They might be more frightened about pointing a gun at their left nut or at their artery if they're a woman. So obviously you can carry it with the safety engaged, which locks the trigger and everything. But let's say you start getting a little bit more comfortable. You know, you've been carrying for like a month or so now. Turn off the safety. That trigger pull is still extremely long. Like there's no way that's going off on accident, right? And the hammer is fairly recessed inside of here, so it's fairly difficult to accidentally pull it back, giving you a very safe gun. And if you do get even more comfortable at a certain point, you can still rock it with the hammer back, which the trigger pull, as I showed before, is still fairly decent. I used this on a scale, and it was over 8 pounds, so it's still not something that's going off on you. Granted, at that point, I would carry something a little bit more modern, because you do get more internal safeties. Not that I've ever had an issue with this, but I can see why people might be a little bit more averse. Funny story, actually. So during the 2020 Summer of Love fun happy times, I had a coworker that was looking at getting a firearm, and she wasn't particularly fond of any of the options on the market. She thought they were too mean and aggressive looking, but I showed her this, and she thought this was the most elegant pistol ever made. And in like 24 hours, turns out she went and bought one. I obviously helped her get some good ammo, and I helped her get some proper self-defense loads and training ammo, but I find it just rather interesting that zero care for usability, practicality, and any other metric that you might want to throw out there. Zero emphasis on any buzzword that you might want to throw out there. She just liked how it looked, thought that the weight was, decent for her, never shot it, but she runs it. I don't know if she still runs it to this day, but it just goes to show you the importance of getting something for the person that they actually want. Because you can sit here and, I told her, just buy a 43X, buy a Smith & Wesson. Nah, nothing. This though, it looks good. For whatever reason, when I did first start shooting this, I quickly noticed that I was getting better groups than my 19 or my 320 or whatever other gun I was shooting at that point. I don't know if it's strictly related to the blowback design or the fixed barrel itself, but I was much more easily able to get groups of just a few inches within a 5 to 7 yard distance, whereas on the other gun, I was struggling quite a bit. And I've seen this similar trend, honestly, across a few friends that I have out shooting, where this, for some reason, just shoots fantastically. Obviously, I've gotten a little bit better in these past few years, so I can actually hold and shoot a 9. They're not inaccurate firearms. That being said, they do pack a little bit more punch than those modern firearms. Even with it only being 9x18, I find it does get kind of punchy in that webbing on your thumb here after about 100 rounds of the range. I did swap out the recoil spring on this to one of the Wolf 17 pounders. This is a 1997 production gun. So I figured that it was probably fairly worn out, considering it's been almost 30 years at this point. Well, I guess 20 something when I first got it. Especially with the self-defense loads, I found that they were really punchy. But with the upgrade to that new spring, it's really not that bad. I can shoot 100, 150 rounds without an issue, whereas before it was giving me a problem. But with some smaller framed people, I could see it still being potentially an issue. Like all the Soviet guns, these were passed around to all their allies. You can get variants of these from Bulgaria, China, East Germany, and obviously Russia as well. There was actually quite a few modernization projects for this as well. The Russians at one point attempted to make one out of plastic with the frame, trying to lighten the load, obviously, because it is fairly stout. That didn't really go anywhere, as far as I understand. That was a shelled project. But even today on the commercial market, you can see people throwing red dots on these. I never thought that was possible, but I mean, they did it, so it clearly is. I've seen variants of these with lights on them as well. I don't know why you'd like to do that. I don't think this needs to be a super serious gun, especially for dropping that much money into it, but to each his own, Ooh, actually, I almost forgot. The best version of this that the Russians tried making was the PB, also known as the Pistolet Bushnoi. Sorry, I know that didn't sound right, but I don't speak foreign. So terribly sorry to any Russian viewers out there. Please yell at me in the comments. But this is the version that came with the suppressor attached to it, which from what I've heard, B&T made quite a few of these, or they have a few of them, and apparently they're really good. I'd love to be able to try one, but I don't think that one's in the card. Honestly though, at the end of the day, I think this is a fantastic firearm. I obviously carried it for a while, but even if you just have it as a range toy, I think it's a really fun historical piece that you can bring out and really just flex on your homies with it, sort of thing, without spending a lot of money either. Obviously, the double action trigger is a little bit tricky to get around, and the heel mag release is a bit outdated, but it still works fairly well. I have never had a malfunction with this firearm if I'm properly holding it, and I'm not using that magazine that likes to have malfunctions. And even if you do accidentally use that magazine and you have a malfunction while you're being assaulted or something like that, this thing's a brick. So you get not 8+1, you get 8 plus 1+1. You get a total of 10 projectiles at that point. So take that as you will. That's all I have for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's anything you want me to cover in specific. I have access to quite a large amount of firearms, so maybe I can make it work. Obviously, I'm into the Soviet stuff, so more of that to come, but let me know if there's something else you guys want. Anyways, have a good one, folks. I shall see you later.